Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, where we're looking at a call-in of a decision. So just to say that the meeting's being streamed live and recorded by the Council for subsequent broadcast via the Council's internet site. I'll start with introductions. So I think this evening we've got quite a lot of people in the room, so we'll just introduce the committee members for with an eye on time. So I'm Matt White, and I'm chair of this committee, and to my left.
Hi, Councillor Pippa Connor, Vice Chair of this committee and Chair of the Adults and Health Scrutiny Committee.
Hello, I'm Adam Small and Chair of our Housing Development and Planning Scrutiny Panel.
Hi, I'm Anna Lawton and I'm Chair of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Panel.
Hi, I'm Akula Yunus. I'm the Chair of Culture, Community Safety and Environment Panel.
Thanks, everyone. And we've got other members and officers here who I'll ask to introduce themselves when they speak. So item 2 on the agenda is apologies for absence. I don't believe we've got any apologies for absence today. Item 3 is urgent business. So while we have no new items of urgent business, we have received a supplementary pack which has the relevant documents for consideration in this call-in, and that's item 6. So that's the supplementary pack which constitutes item 6 on the agenda. Okay. Item 4 is declarations of interest. So I'd like to ask committee members to indicate if they have any declarations of interest to make at this point. I can't see any. So moving on.
Sorry, Chair. Apologies, I hadn't thought about this, but at one point in the deputation, in the proceedings tonight, there's discussion around murals that was in Muswell Hill Ward previously. I just wanted to note that I think that's in the pack already, but I just want to say because I'm a councillor for Muswell Hill Ward, so just be really clear that, yeah, okay, thanks.
Okay, and also to note that there are murals in every ward. But the murals in Muswell Hill Ward are specifically mentioned, I know, but there are murals in every ward.
Yes.
Ward councillors.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, but thanks for that. That's noted. Right. So before we start the business of the meeting, I'd just like to ask all attendees to keep in mind the pre-election guidance. We're now in the pre-election period, so I'd just like everyone to be aware that they shouldn't be making any statements that could be associated with any particular party. This discussion at this meeting will relate only to the call-in. So let's start, and I'd just like to confirm that this committee has been asked to scrutinise the decision that was taken by Cabinet on the 10th of March, which was a decision on Neighbourhood Community Infrastructure Levy Spending Round 2. This is a decision that can't be implemented until the Overview and Scrutiny Committee has undertaken its scrutiny. But I need to be clear here that what we're not doing here tonight is retaking the decision of Cabinet. So I'd like to note that the resolutions are set out at attachment C in the supplementary pack and at pack page 48. Right. I now would like to refer to the Deputy Monitoring Officer to provide some advice. Heidi.
Thank you, Chair. So can I ask the members to note that the call-in process is set out on page 2 of the Monitoring Officer's report. At section 6 of that report in detail sets out the full call-in procedure, and members will be asked to determine whether the original decision made on the 10th of March is inside or outside of the budget or policy framework. If the committee determines that the policy is within the budget and policy framework, the decision that was made as per the report, there are 3 possible outcomes for the call-in as set out in paragraph 6.3 of the Monitoring Officer's report.
Thank you, Heidi. Okay. So I'm now going to briefly set out the running order of the meeting for attendees tonight. So first of all, I'm going to ask Councillor Rossetti, who's the lead signatory on the call-in, to put forward the call-in. We're then going to have questions from the committee to Councillor Rossetti. The Cabinet member will then be asked, which is Councillor Williams. Councillor Williams will be asked to respond to the call-in, and we'll then have questions from the committee for Councillor Williams and the officers that are here tonight. Once we've done that, we're going to adjourn the meeting, and committee members, along with the Deputy Monitoring Officer and Head of Democratic Services, are going to have a discussion in private. Once we've reached our decision, we're going to come back to the meeting room, and we'll reopen the public meeting, and we'll start streaming again, and we'll outline our decision and our reasoning for our decision. Okay, so that's all a kind of lead in to the substantive items. Right, next item is item 5, which is deputations, petitions, presentations and questions. I do not believe we've had any deputations. Nothing there. So moving on. Right, it's now time for item 6, which is the main item, basically. So I'm going to ask Councillor Rossetti to introduce the call-in. You've got 5 minutes.
Funding to be needed to. There is also a list of our this table 3 of the data pack of page 72. There are some examples, page 74. So now to the call-in. The call-in of this cabinet decision is based on 4 main points. First one is that there is no evidence of public support for the, namely the of 120K for water wells and 32K for civic center communal garden and gardening, or any evidence of how these were nominated. There is nowhere on the commonplace map a mention to the gardens or to the water. The officer response states that this information was not given for reason of brevity, and the murals were streets and curbside improvement, therefore in the top 3 priorities by the residents. And this is the rationale. They also indicate that murals were discussed and agreed with the and Cauchan neighborhood code. So, murals were listed as cultural facilities in the cabinet document. You can see that on page 17, rather than street and curbside improvement. And cultural facilities are priority number 5 in the resident priorities. The cabinet report gives example of streets and curbside improvement on the same page 17 of the data pack, but does not list what the murals or festival there. And similarly, the list of eligible infrastructure on table 3 of the data pack does not list any cultural act. There is no evidence of support from the Highgate Crouch neighborhood. The contrary, I have heard that they were not discussed and agreed with them, but rather presented as a fact. So it would be even more important to have positive confirmation, and the panel can ask, I think, officers to add evidence to this of these discussions. And similarly, for the woodland gardens, there is no evidence of support. There is a request for an indoor cafe in the civic center, which had 0 thumbs up on the complex map, and this cannot be taken as a support for an outside wooden garden because both need residents. On the contrary, there were more than 60 thumbs up to support the enclosing of the nearby Trinity Garden, it's really attached to the city center, to make it safer for children to play, but this wasn't considered for funding. The second point we argue is the funding status of proposed project. The cabinet report states that Civic Center Woodland Garden is eligible because no alternative funding is available. In the officer response, we note that there was a provisional allocation that fell through because no budget anymore. But the cabinet document contradicts this because it states that the use of sealed funding was to reduce the cost by replacing borrowing with external funding. So we know the 130K funds were allocated, and the council published on its website on the 3rd of December a request for expression of interest to design the woodland garden and a request to submit the design by the 19th of January. So either the council misled the public asking to submit design for an unfunded project, or Mr. Councillor when saying project is unfunded, Or the decision was predetermined and the expression of interest was done with the seed money contribution of an email. We do not believe this decision complied with the eligibility criteria, which was positively picked on the Appendix C table, and this is on page 41 of the data pack. And I want to remind everyone that those are criteria to be met. So a tick means that criteria have been met. Third point, projects which are not capital infrastructure. I think I've addressed this earlier, and I've seen the response from office. Nobody disputes the positive contribution of art and community building. But murals are not infrastructure of any kind. There is no explanation of why murals would meet the definition of infrastructure, whether cultural infrastructure or street and curbside infrastructure. This is quite a stretch, and I'm sure that if we ask any residents what they would think, they will not think of murals as street and curbside infrastructure. The next point was about constitutional principle of decision making. There is no evidence that the allocation plays due regard to the consultation. There is no indication of the source of each proposal, especially those two proposals were singled out, how they were shortlisted, weighted, and scored against all proposals submitted on the common plans. A score against the eligibility criteria of those projects selected on Appendix C is not a substitute, especially as there were many submissions and it was admitted at the cabinet meeting, there were many competing projects and very difficult decisions to be made. So in conclusion, what we ask is the decision is not taken forward, that a revised report is presented indicating clearly a list of proposals with more than one vote, evidence of residents nominating and supporting specific projects, and how each project was weighted and scored, and a rerun of the decision with all of the above. The 60 plus residents that requested enclosing.
Could you wind up, please, because we're at 5 minutes. Oh, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Rossetti, for setting out the call in. Can I ask members of the committee if they have any questions for Councillor Rossetti? Councillor Small.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Rossetti. If I could just pick up on, let's start with number one, because it feels like an easy place to start, on the public support. Number one, the public support for projects. So you were outlining that the distinction between nominated projects and whether all the allocations of funding went to nominated projects. But the NSIL policy does seem to indicate pretty clearly that it's not just about nominated projects. I think the quote that you've given is the council will then determine how neighbourhood SIL receipts are spent against the list of projects compiled. But actually, in reality, that isn't the full sentence within the NSIL policy. It then goes on to say, with having regard to this consultation. Do you accept that not every bit of NSIL funding has to be allocated to a nominated project that has been nominated in the consultation?
Decided that they there is evidence of they only it's very difficult. So there is a risk. And then why we don't to say and needs to do and then they see that.
Thank you. We'll come back to the no evidence point, but actually with the priorities that are also part of the consultation, they do, just by very nature as being a priority, they do they do to them have a sense of vagueness. I just as a quick one, for example, in your opinion, if you were to add a bunch of trees to a street, do you think that would be a curbside improvement? If we were to plant a bunch of trees along a street, would that be a curbside improvement? Sorry, Councillor Rossetti, if I could just ask you,
Yeah.
if we were to plant a bunch of trees along a street, do you think it would be a curbside improvement? If we were to plant trees along a street, do you think it would be classed as part of a street or curbside improvement? Well, so this is kind of the point I wanted to make, is that actually the priorities that are part of the consultation, which allow for people to express, rather than a specific project, the sort of area that they would like the council to consider, has various different overlaps and purposes. And so, for example, there are quite a few things in street and curbside improvements that also you could take from tree planting and green spaces and the cultural facilities. So what I'm trying to understand is, considering the overlap of these things, that something could be both a cultural asset and a street and curbside improvement. Do you think there's the priorities element of the consultation is appropriate to have a wider berth than just specific projects that are allocated or suggested within the consultation?
Residents.
Because there is no other evidence that otherwise those projects has been supported or nominated by anyone else.
Councillor Rossetti, do you think a resident would make that distinction? Do you think a resident would say, well, I couldn't possibly consider a mural as part of a street or curbside improvement because it is only a cultural facility? So if I... Okay, and just if I may, Chair, sorry, just on the murals point. So the additional information that has been provided indicates that 5 out of 9 wards did indicate support for murals. 5 out of 9 wards. Well, I am going to make an assumption that the information given by officers is honest. I'm going to make that assumption.
I don't know why. Has not been selected in favor of other projects. And also, if I may say something about cultural infrastructure,
Okay, I haven't any evidence.
Okay, thanks. I think you've made your position clear on that. Right, thanks. Does anyone have anything else to ask on this specific first point on public support? Sorry, Councillor Connor.
Hi, thank you, Councillor Rossetti. So talking about public support, I just happened to be at the cabinet meeting actually when Dan came to the cabinet around the civic garden that was being proposed, and I heard his deputation. So I noted in the reference within the papers around that they were not in support of putting the money forward for the Civic Garden Centre. So just from your perspective in this around public support, what weight do you give having a deputation from Bounds Green around this in terms of highlighting the concerns that you were raising tonight?
For me, it's one of those weights that should be considered when making the decision, because clearly when you have a deputation, it means the residents want to highlight something. And the issue with those woodland gardens is that there was no nomination on commonplace map. It's true there was a request for a community cafe inside the civic center. I checked on the map, there is not even one thumbs up. So somebody made the request. For a leap of faith or a stretch of imagination, there has been a sort of association, okay, rather than an indoor cafe, we're going to do an outside woodland garden. And that's where the community will meet. And I mean, it's a sort of displacement. And all this when really next door to the civic center, there were 60 plus thumbs up for enclosing Trinity Gardens, because there is no fence. They were proposing like bushes all around, because children are playing in these gardens, and effectively they could run in the, you know, on the main road, and there is no sort of boundaries. So there was a real concrete project requested very clearly by the community next to the civic center, and this was not taken into consideration. And again, I think it has to be explained why. Where is the, you know, why something that received 0 thumbs up has been weighted more highly than, you know, than the Trinity Garden Center, and has been suggested that this could be effectively be taken as a symbol of a request for the wood garden near the civic center.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any more questions on this first point? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Councillor Rossetti. Just on that point, can you see a perfectly legitimate reason why a resident in Bounds Green might prefer to have £30,000 of investment in their area rather than in a neighbouring ward? So can you see why there would be an impetus for a resident in Bounds Green to say, I would rather the council spent money on a gardens in my neighbourhood rather than in the ward next door?
I think all residents did put on the commonplace map projects where they thought that there was a need for a project. So I'm sure that some have put a request for a zebra crossing, even in, you know, in other places if they move into other wards.
Okay, thank you very much. And just on a similar point, is there any risk that if the council were to follow a procedure where, the procedure that is set out in the NSIL doesn't indicate that, as far as I can see, that the most popular projects are the ones that are given the green light? And I can see a logic behind that, because one, I don't think just the loudest people who shout the loudest or are able to gain a lot of popularity should get the attention. So do you think that the policy is supposed to only give the green light to projects that are the most popular, or do you think there is scope within the policy to allow for variation based on a whole bunch of factors, the priorities being one of them?
So what I'm saying is not that we should rate higher the most popular project. What I'm saying is that when you choose between several submissions, several projects, you should be able to provide scoring weight for each of the process. That's what happens to any, you know, you go to tender, you have all proposal weighted and scored against a set of criteria. It's not a popularity contest. So I'm not saying that the most popular should be getting the funding, but decisions should be explained. And those that
you know, the residents that have ticked a lot of those, you know, thumbs up on each project, they should know why the project has not been selected. And if there isn't any sort of mapping of or scoring or what weight has been given to each criteria, it is impossible for them to know, okay, why my project has not been selected and another one has been selected.
Okay, thanks. We spent a lot of time on that first point. Just on the second point, I just want to ask because the second point is about certain specific projects not fitting one of the criteria that the report claims that it fits. But do you accept that it's not necessary for a project to fit all of the criteria in that list? I think there are 12 in order for it to be an eligible project. It just needs it's just a list of criteria that are kind of a guide. So not fitting that particular criterion isn't necessarily a kind of bar to it being an acceptable project. Do you accept that point?
I accept it absolutely. And in fact, if you look at table 3, you will see that there are several projects that do not tick all the different criteria. But what the seal guide governance says is the more criteria met, the greater the priority the seal funding a project will receive. So the point that was made in this number 2 reason is that the civic center, the garden was assigned an eligibility criteria B, as in no other funding was available. So if that box has been ticked, it means that it meets that criteria, which doesn't correspond to what is said later on in the same cabinet report, because the cabinet report in 636 says that they prefer a different form of funding. And above all, it doesn't explain why there was a tender for these woodland gardens on the Commonplace website and with a brief, and there was a deadline to submit proposal by the 19th January with a provision 130K. So there was funding. So that's the point there.
Okay, that's understood.
And yes, absolutely. Going back to your question, not everyone will obviously meet all the criteria, but if something is being ticked, I agree it's not pass or fail, but to me, ticked means it meets the criteria.
Okay, thanks. That's understood. Does anyone have any follow-up questions on this point? Okay, moving on then. Just on the third point, which is about projects that are not capital infrastructure or addressing the demands of development. You said earlier that you thought that murals don't fit the definition of infrastructure. And I'm just interested because if I look on page 72, which is the regulation 123 list, and it gives a list of types of infrastructure that would be eligible for SIL funding. And it mentions public realm improvements. So obviously, I would personally think murals would fit the definition of public realm improvements, but clearly in your view, they fall the wrong side of the line of them being considered infrastructure. So I'm just wondering where you would draw the line between public realm improvements that are infrastructure and public realm improvements that aren't. Where would you draw that line?
The point I've been trying to make is that those murals have been defined first at cabinet document as cultural infrastructure. The response to the call-in said, no, they're not cultural infrastructure, so priority number 5, they are street and curbside infrastructure. Now, I don't see here, I don't see anything about cultural infrastructure. So, okay, you say there might be public realm improvements, but that's not how they've been defined in all the documents. There has been no clear explanation of why murals or festival or why those fit the definition of infrastructure. And they've been presented as infrastructure throughout the initial document and the response. So that's what I'm trying to suggest.
Okay, thanks. Does anyone have any follow-up questions on this point? Point 3? Oh, Councillor Rossetti, do you mind moving over to where you're yeah, it's just because the camera's not picking you up when you speak.
Ah, okay.
Oh, it's to do with which mic you're using. It automatically picks up the
Use 3 mics.
yeah. Apologies for that. Technical issues.
I hope I don't have to restart from the beginning.
Okay. Did you have a point on point 3, Councillor Cox?
So point of clarification, sorry, Councillor Rossetti, I know you've just moved round. So just to be really clear then, in the definition in these papers that the murals are fitting into street and curbside improvements, what would you be your understanding of what street and curbside improvements would entail? If you would, you know, how are you presenting this rather than
I would define that as pavement, resurfacing, zebra crossing, lighting, this sort of infrastructure and improvement.
Okay, thanks. Now, any Councillor Small, did you have a
And sorry, if I may, I think
Thank
that the original cabinet report does agree, because you see a list of projects that they've included in the street and curbside improvement, and murals are not there. They are under cultural infrastructure. So they would have been there if the officers would know that there would have been street and curbside infrastructure.
Okay. Any further questions, Councillor Small?
Just on the NSIL element of the demands that development puts on the on an area. I don't know about you, I personally often get told by residents that new builds perhaps are changing the culture of an area, the community, that there's not as much cohesion and so on. Is there anything in the officer's response 9.2 and 9.3 on page 61 about cohesion, identity, local pride and character that you think does mean that public realm improvements fall under an infrastructure categorization as the council suggests?
I don't think this is what I think. I think the point is that we did a consultation and there have been hundreds of submissions from residents. If they wanted murals, they would have said they wanted murals on the common place. So clearly they've indicated the different priorities and they've indicated the other projects. So I don't doubt, as I said, that, you know, arts is fundamental for community building to increase integration among community. But I don't believe that this is what the seal is about.
Thank you, Councillor Rossetti, but it's a slightly different answer to a different question, because that's about whether or not the murals or so on are popular, or whether they are the choice of residents. What I'm asking is if you think there is any merit to the argument that these are public realm improvements, that these do constitute infrastructure under the definition within the NSIL policy, but also the government guidance for NSIL policy we have on that 6.6 on page 19 as well. Oh no, sorry, that might be the wrong thing. It's 9.3, the local plan policy, DM3, and so on. I just want to get really clear. It is just irrelevant of the popularity of them. It's just not your belief that public art could constitute infrastructure under the NSIL policy. I just want to clarify that, please.
It's my belief that they were not among the priorities indicated by the residents. because we have 3 priorities that have been picked up by officers for the cabinet decision, and they were not in those 3 priorities because they were listed as cultural facilities, and this was priority number 5. So again, the point is, all those other projects that were selected, and do they meet those top 3 criteria, those top 3 priorities? Not for murals, not for, I don't believe they don't.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so do we have any further questions on the call-in? Yeah, there's the last point about the constitutional principles of decision making. That seems to me to be a complaint that there's not been enough detail or evidence provided. So it seems clear to me what's being asked here. I don't really have any questions on that. I don't know if anybody else does. No. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Councillor Rossetti. Okay, so now it's time for Councillor Williams to set out the response to the call-in. Councillor Williams, you've got 5 minutes.
I suppose I just sort of feel that this call-in is sort of sad. I mean, it's a bit of good news story. £1.7 million being spent across the borough. This is phase round 2. We have round 3 coming along. Obviously, there's going to be huge disappointment because with over 500 submissions individually, then of course the priorities and the overarching sort of priorities we know that residents have, it is terribly difficult to decide. And what these 2 decisions, which you seem to take huge exception to, are basically just for some more trees in a place that doesn't have many trees, and everybody wants more trees. A woodland garden, I mean, I'm a bit aghast as why anybody could be opposed to that. And I think it's real splitting hairs and semantics on this public art projects, because out of 5 of the 9 Ensel areas have put public art murals as a priority in itself, despite it's in the report, lists where they are. Well, it's in the report. I mean, you can, when we, the officers can be asked to speak to that as well. I do trust that officers write honestly when they're preparing documents for important meetings like this. And to say there has been engagement on all of these projects, and something like being the London Borough of Culture is a really, really important thing for Haringey and a really important thing for residents. And I think your point, to be fair, about is this a mural they want? Is it going to be a statue they want? That's going to be up to residents at the point when it's being, badged as murals, but there's nobody's writing in stone what a mural is at this point, and I don't think you'll find a dictionary definition. It could be whatever residents and artists design, and it's going to be a legacy of the Borough of Culture. In my own ward, you'll probably know about the incredible mural which is listed now and has been dismantled on Broadwater Farm. It's had international interest in that mural, which was built and designed and made with the community all those years ago, following the first riots. And it is about community cohesion. It was absolutely about community cohesion, and that's why it's listed, and that's why we put great store by such art in this borough. And that's just one of a couple of pieces of art on Broadwater Farm that we will keep in perpetuity, because they are lasting legacies to communities and to cohesion. And I personally think it's got public backing, that everybody wants to have improvements ward by ward. What is the particular character of a ward? Across the borough, it'll be very different. Residents will have a very different view, and they'll be able to express those views in a way which will have permanency to it, and will include, people from across those wards, children, adults, older people, everybody. So I just really like to say, please stop splitting hairs and trying to say process and procedure. It's sort of a really boring and cynical I think this is, you know, people across the political spectrum, whatever, have really engaged in all of our consultations, engagements really positively, and not one member of the public has come to me who hasn't got political ambition, I should say, to say they have an issue with the way we've allocated these funds. And I would say to residents as well, watch out for round 3. To try and have another go at getting some money, because I know 1.7 million sounds like a lot of money, but when it's split up across the borough, it ends up not being a huge amount in each area. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. Okay, so it's now time for questions for Councillor Williams and the officers that are with her today. Who would like to start? Councillor Lawson.
It's more of an officer-based question, but I suppose there was a kind of allegation or suggestion that the public support isn't very well evidenced. I just wondered if you had any comments on that and where the public support for these things has come from.
Yeah,
Bryce, could you introduce yourself when you start speaking?
Bryce Double, head of spatial planning. So you're referring to the allegation that the public support is not very well evidenced. I mean, of course, there's always the ability to put more evidence in a report, so we've tried to reach that balance. There are numerous paragraphs in the report, in the introduction, in the main body, that refer to the regard that's been had to the community feedback we've received. There's an appendix that lists how every project has identified public support. So I think it has been evidenced. Perhaps not to the extent that some people might wish, but I do believe that it's been provided within the report.
Thanks. I've got a question. Maybe if we take it point by point though, because I've got a question on the second point. Has anyone got any questions on the first point in the call-in? Councillor Connor.
Hi, yeah. So I've got a number of hopefully quite quick ones to go through. So I just wanted to be really clear. When I was reading the report, and I'm looking to officers now because obviously you were sort of brought up as obviously you've written the report. The 5 areas that were supported with public, my understanding was public art, not. I didn't see murals in that sentence within the report. So could I just clarify that point? Because I think that was just something to be just for clarification. The second thing around public backing, I think the difficulty for us, because we're a scrutiny committee and we are scrutinising what's in front of us. And of course, in the call-in, it's saying, well, we can't see where the public evidence for this support is. And actually, it's really hard then for us to just say, okay, well, you've said that there's support and we're going, okay, but we need something a little bit more concrete to just be able to scrutinise that, because actually this is public money and we are responsible as councillors to ensure that residents understand that they've been treated fairly, and that if they've supported projects and they haven't come, you know, to pass, then why haven't they? And I think that that's a really, you know, robust challenge really that we all sort of understand as councillors. So I think it's just to understand a little bit more about that. And then I think it was around the yes, about the first part about this, the murals being street and curbside improvements, because I noted the change from the cultural bit, which made sense, to the street and curbside improvement, which to me, I have to say, talking to residents, they just want pavements where you don't trip up. We had a really excellent report commissioned by the council on sort of accessibility, street access. It came to OSC actually. It was the high streets and town centres for inclusive response. We had people with disabilities come out with us as councillors to walk round our town centres. And they were really clear about what we could do to improve access for people with disabilities and people with limited mobility. And they made some really quite sort of small but important things about dropping curbs and putting that tactile paving in where appropriate. And it wasn't a lot of money, but we were, my impression was that as the council, we just didn't have a lot of money at that point, and we all understand the financial constraints we're under. So I suppose if I was taking the street and curbside improvement, a lot of people might have ticked that thinking actually that they were going to get that better accessibility, which is from that report. And then, and then so finally, it's really just around the question around if we're doing community engagement. I mean, I've listened to the bit around the gardens, the bit about the civic centre gardens, and just on the bit about public support for projects. My understanding is that in the consultation process, there was an understanding that you could tick for, community space and a cafe, which sounded very sensible. But if you didn't have the money at that point to do the gardens which you wanted to do, why wasn't that added at that point so that the public could have ticked that if that's actually where that they thought, actually, we don't want the money to go to that other garden next door with the fencing off, which actually sounds quite sensible so that children don't run out on the street, but that's not where we want the money. We actually think that actually this is where it should go. And then, of course, we could evidence that here tonight. And as a scrutiny committee, we could scrutinise it and go, right, OK, it's evidence. We understand now where that support's coming from. So there's quite a few questions, really, but it's just around understanding within the report how you've evidenced and how you can reassure us and as a scrutiny committee around those points. Thank you.
Sorry, Bryce, to interrupt. Could you please put your microphone on?
Oh, sorry. Luckily, I have quite a loud voice, but I'm sorry about that. So I think that's kind of covered off. So the third point was around, are murals a street and curbside improvement, or are they a community facility? I mean, there could be both. I was the main author of the report. When I wrote the report, it was on the basis that murals are a form of street and curbside improvement. That is my professional view in that regard, and that's the basis on which I prepared Appendix C and I prepared the report. The fourth one, was around the civic gardens and public support. Well, I mean, we explicitly sought two things. One, what are people's general priorities? And are there any specific projects which people might like to see money get spent on? So we're very clear about that. To my mind, the Wooden Gardens is completely in alignment with the number one priority, which was tree planting and green spaces. It ticks both of those very well. In an ideal world, this isn't set out in the guidance. You might do two consultations. You might ask people for priorities, and then you might put forward a set of specific proposals. That's not what the governance sets out. It's one consultation where we try to pull in feedback from a large number of people. Of course, it's not just about the consultation response. It's also about the extent to which projects deliver against the guiding criteria. So in preparing the report, there's been a lot of engagement with internal services experts from across the council who've supported me in preparing that Appendix C. You mentioned around street and curbside improvements. There are many desirable types of street and curbside improvement, including the types you've mentioned around curbs and accessibility issues that might be able to be addressed with money. We have also put all the projects through an equalities lens, as you can see in the appendix. So they've also been considered on that front. So I think that picks up most of my questions. I may have missed the last one, Councillor Connor. So do remind me on that front.
Sorry. Just quickly to go back. So one about the gardens, I didn't really understand the answer. So you're saying that within the consultation, you put forward the ideas around the cafe and community space, but you didn't put the garden bit in? And I'm just, that was the question. Why one and what not the other? If you particularly were thinking there's public support for that, and I hear exactly what you're saying to me. And the second one is the second bit is around what was my last question? Okay, if you answer that bit, I'll come back. Sorry, it's just literally slipped my mind. I was just writing it down. Sorry.
Okay, so as I understand, it's why have we proceeded with the woodland garden as opposed to proceeding with Trinity Gardens? Is that the essential question?
Yes, but also why put in the community? I mean, if you're going to put in the cafe and the community area, absolutely fine. But why not put in the civic, the woodland gardens as well? And as in that package, I've not understood quite why you've done one but not the other for that support. Because then you would have had, if you're confident that that's actually where the public was going to really go for it, then you would have been able to evidence that. And I think I'm still really concerned that I still haven't understood where the evidence is in any of these documents around any data or evidence that we can see and scrutinize. And it's not about making a decision on that. It literally is just asking for information that we can scrutinize so we can go back to residents and say, and that's, sorry, the final bit was on the street and curbside improvements. You've said that you've understood that within that definition, murals is an important part of that. I would actually challenge that at this point and say, okay, so that's your definition, but how do residents understand that that's the definition that was being used? Because when we're talking OSC and in council, we had the accessibility studies. We've been talking a lot about this at OSC, about accessibility for residents. So in my head, when I'm talking to residents, it's all about improving the public realm so that people can access our facilities without sort of falling or tripping or anything. So I'm just really unsure as to why we've got from street and curbside means murals, not street and curbside means accessibility in the public realm.
Okay, well, I mean, it's not a perfect process. So broadly, what's happened is there's been a consultation. People have expressed through the consultation two things: their general priorities for spend within their area. So if we're talking about this particular area, it was tree planting and green spaces and street and curbside improvements. So there's that one piece of information. The second piece of information are the specific schemes that people have put forward as proposals. So across the borough, I think we had 560 in total. So you've got a very small team of officers passing through 500 plus projects, which is a significant undertaking. At that point, we're starting internal conversations with other services, say, okay, well, these are the express priorities within the area. Are there any projects that I may not be aware of or that might not have been suggested by the community that could perform very well against the NSIL guiding criteria? So there's that internal engagement. So there's the assessment of these projects that might not have been suggested, but perform very well against the criteria, which includes the woodland gardens. Then there's the separate assessment of the projects suggested by the community. Some of those will perform well against guiding criteria. Others, there were kind of in principle objections from officers for various reasons. So some of those had to be discounted. You're then looking at a process of, okay, well, are there preferred projects? Are there strong and weak alternatives? And going through that process. We've done filtering of projects using the NSIL guiding criteria. Maybe the full detail is not provided in the report. Obviously, you have to take a view about, well, what's the appropriate level of information? As officers, we've sought to provide that in the report. I think it might just be a case of perhaps it would have been ideal to have provided a bit more detail, but that's not to say we didn't go through that process. We've been through a very significant and substantive process. We've been through hundreds and hundreds of projects. I can speak to dozens and dozens of those personally myself. I've had dozens and dozens of conversations with officers from highways, from travel and transport, from parks, from the culture team, from across the council. So it's been a really comprehensive exercise. So I just want to stress that. And then just in terms of the street and curbside improvements. So, I mean, that's broad definition to my mind. There is no definition written on paper anywhere. Unfortunately, I have my view, you will have your view, but that incorporates any number of things. I'm sure there are hundreds and hundreds of street and curbside projects that could have been considered under that banner. I'm not familiar with the particular document you've referenced. I'm afraid that you've seen it, another scrutiny committee. But these are things that we can consider as part of future NSIL rounds, and happy to look at again.
Thanks. I just want to ask on this point about public support. Just going back to the kind of the policy and other guidance. Just the way it's worded, and this would include, you know, national legislation on the matter as well. Is it necessary for a project to have public support in the area for it to be eligible for neighbourhood SIL, or is it just that we need to do the engagement and have regard to that in deciding how that money is just a kind of technical question about.
So there's a couple of layers to it, but the government and its policy around SIL is quite clear that NSIL should be spent in consultation with local communities, and our own NSIL governance or SIL governance document is prepared off the back of that. So as a comprehensive part of the process in Haringey of allocating SIL, we carry out comprehensive consultation. So there was consultation involved in the preparation of this document at various points over the last 10 years or so. We've carried out a comprehensive consultation with 2,700 responses in line with the requirement here. Off the back of that consultation, an open-minded consultation, we've compiled an initial list of projects based upon the priorities of people within the area and based upon suggested projects. What we've then done is work through that internally, pass through that with colleagues, with expert input, with some filtering to arrive at a reduced list. And the ones that you've seen recommended in this particular report are the ones that perform highest or perform very well against the NSIL governance criteria, and also perform well against inequalities, are in line with the general consultation feedback that we had. So that's the process we've been through. I think it's quite clearly set out in the report, the thinking, the fact that all of the projects tick those key boxes as set out in the appendix.
Okay, thanks. Did anyone else have questions on this first point about public engagement? No. Okay, thanks. So moving on to the second point, which is about the funding status, which particularly focuses on the criterion B. So does anyone have any questions on that? There's quite, Councillor Small first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, could I just get some clarity around B? Because it says the use of SIL funding is necessary. This is one of the criteria that is assessed against. The use of SIL funding is necessary as no alternative funding sources are available to deliver the proposed infrastructure. I mean, in theory, surely we could, unless the council is going to make a determination to not borrow, but that's a political choice. Surely you could argue that there is always a choice to borrow against it. So can you just clarify, when you are assessing that, what you are determining as no alternative funding? And then just as a follow-up, if you could address the call-in, as I understand it, is trying to draw what is identifying they seem to identify. It's talking about what they seem to identify as a contradiction between we have to use SIL funding because otherwise there is no possible way of delivering these funding for these projects, but also that these projects will save us from having to borrow because we can use the SIL funding. If you could just clarify how you make those determinations around funding and what funding is available, please.
Yeah, thank you. So I think my view is that these guiding criteria are not necessarily the perfect criteria. And I think there are some inherent issues within them, but in any event, they are our guiding criteria. So, I mean, you could make the argument that there is always an alternative funding source for every project because the council could borrow to deliver it. But is there a realistic alternative funding source to deliver these NSIL projects? And I think the answer is, for pretty much all of them, no. The council is fully committed with its capital programme at the current time. And I'm sure finance colleagues could speak to that. So I think we clearly take the view that these NSIL projects that are being recommended, there is no credible alternate funding source that we are aware of. In any event, even if there was a credible alternate funding source, that doesn't preclude NSIL from being spent on them. These aren't pass or fail criteria. They are just a set of guiding criteria. It's also the case that there are no projects recommended within this cabinet paper for NSIL round 2 spend, which are currently funded via the capital programme, as set out in the report.
Thanks. Councillor Connor.
Point of clarification on Councillor Small's question, actually. So, and this was brought up earlier on as part of the papers tonight. So I'm going back to page 60 and 8.6, which is exactly what you've just quoted, saying there are no projects recommended for the NSIL round 2 spend, which are currently funded via the capital programme. So you've been really clear about that. However, I mean, this was actually because it came from the deputation, but I then went back and had a look, and there is a project, a tender out from the council to tender for this project on the garden and woodland of £120,000 budget. Now the budget from the SIL funding is only it's £32,560.93. So that doesn't make any sense to me. So either in December, before we'd had the consultation with residents, why did the council put out a tender for people to apply for this project? And they said it was £120,000. The £20,000 was to design, and the £100,000 was to build the garden and the woodlands. And then for that, the application was on the 19th of December 2025, and the project start date was for February 2026. So that seems to contradict that there wasn't any money, because you've tendered it, so, and it's gone out, so the public are applying for this. But the 120,000 is far greater than the SIL funding of 32,560. So even if we said, okay, so actually we've made a huge mistake, that £120,000, we completely didn't mean to do that. We didn't mean to put that out to tender. That actually, we don't have that money, because that's what you said at 8.6. That 32,000 is nowhere near going to cover what you've already said that it should cover. So what's going on here in terms of the finances?
So the position, as I understand it, and it's quite common for the council actually to commission design work based on a certain project value when the council doesn't have the money in hand at the moment to deliver the project. So there is a notional budget of £20,000 to deliver a design of the woodland garden and to carry out co-design in relation to that design. And the designer is being asked to design a garden for a total value of £100,000. So that's the money that's notionally allocated to that. It is the advice of colleagues elsewhere in the council that the council doesn't currently have that funding to deliver that. And that is the basis on which NSIL is being allocated to this project. And you are correct that 32,000 is not 100,000. But it will be a part contribution towards that. I'm led to believe that the remaining contribution of 68,000, give or take a few pounds and pennies, will be levered in from elsewhere, so that full £100,000 will be available from external funding, from NSIL and from an alternate funding source.
John, did you want to come in on this?
I'd just like to confirm what Bryce has said. It's exactly right. We are looking to tender that design solution, which we've done before. I think we did it on Down Lane Park. I think we do it regularly, that we do these 2-stage tendering processes, so that we can, in the event that grant becomes available or NSIL, we can actually, we've got shovel ready projects.
Sorry, thanks, Chair. Just to clarify. So, okay, so just to be really clear, this looks like a predetermined approach. So as a resident, not sitting on the council, as just a normal, person out in the community, if I looked at this and I said, okay, the council's already put out a pre-tender, and it now wants the SIL funding to sort of supplement that, and it's going to find 68,000 and something from elsewhere, that I would say, looks like that's actually already been predetermined, that that's actually where that money was going to go. So all the residents' things about these parklets and everything else that they were voting for, why was that? Or are you saying that actually that money could have come from somewhere else completely if you didn't think you were getting the support for it? Because if you're saying that the woodland garden with the civic centre was something that was going through this consultation process, that's fair. But because you've already put this out on the 19th of December, it does indicate that that's actually something that the council really wanted to use that money to spend it on, rather than asking residents with a clean slate, actually, where do you want to sort of put the money? So do you see what I'm saying? Just from a resident's perspective, so not sitting here with all the sort of the legal things behind it. It just looks like that was a predetermined.
Chair, if I could take this, because I think that feels like not enough a question for officers. I think, you know, you've been involved in local government a long time, and a lot of projects go unfunded for a long time. So what this is a contribution to a project that we know residents want, we know aligns with their priorities, and it will hopefully make it more likely to happen that there is this essentially new park in that bit of Woodside that's for the whole community. If you take any park in the borough, they quite often have master plans which are totally unfunded, and you will have put a tender out for that master plan, right? But it doesn't mean you've got the funding for it. That's, you know, I'm sure with all of your experience, you appreciate that's how it works.
Okay, thanks. Yep. Okay. Does anyone have any further questions on this point? Point 2.
Yes. So we're on murals. So this is on mural, not the garden, because I think I've made my point and I've heard the response back. So we are where we are with that. So on page 24, we've got the total mural cost of £123,500. So this is really about the funding status of these projects. So again, looking at this point in time, if the council was in, you know, we were in the black, we had lots of money to spend, we had lots of things for niceties, lots of extra. Okay, I still won't be happy around the evidence on this. But the bit that I'm struggling with is that if I'm a resident and I'm looking at this and thinking, hang on, the council's spending £123,500 on murals at a point when we're in the red and we're on government loan. Now, this is extra money, this is still money, but I'm going back to sort of that accessibility thing that we've had at OSC about, you know, actually making the realm really good for people to sort of use and just get around and just really enjoy that realm. Benches is another one that my residents are begging for, and officers are coming back to me, so we've got no money for a bench. My elderly and frail people can't sit down unless they go to the library or a cafe, and luckily we've got the library. But you know, that's I'm just sort of thinking as residents, if we've got £123,000, why aren't we doing sort of like the bits that residents really are begging us as councillors to put in, and we are asking you guys, and you're going, I'm really sorry, councillor, but we genuinely haven't got any money at the moment, and we understand that because we've done budget scrutiny, and you know, and we're going back to residents going, I'm really sorry, you know, we are really tight now for money. We've got still money, and we're spending it on other things, which, you know, it's a nice extra, but what about the actual basics? So it's really just about that and about the funding of these proposed projects. Can we afford to do that at this point in time in the council? 10 years ago, maybe, but I'm just asking about the here and now. Thanks.
So I'll come in on this again, Councillor O'Connor. Sorry, not O'Connor. There's a Churchill quote, isn't there, about art? This is NSIL money. This is to be distributed and to be spent in this fashion. You keep saying what residents want is, well, we did a thorough engagement process, consultation process, to find out what residents wanted, and that came out as in most of the areas, trees and green spaces was their priority. So we know that it wasn't benches and all the other priorities you're going to say residents want. That's not what came out of the consultation. So I can't just say what residents I spoke to yesterday wanted. That's why we conduct these engagements. To say there's loads and loads of stuff residents want, of course there is, and goodness, I wish I could fund it all. But to dismiss public art as irrelevant in these times, I think is really wrong and really misguided. It's at these times that residents really need to come together, because it's not just the lasting legacy that will be there, it's the creating of that legacy is going to involve residents as well. So that's an active, positive thing. And actually, when we talk, excuse me, about some of the issues we have across the borough with disengagement with youth, with antisocial behaviour, with areas that are perhaps blighted, you'll see that some art projects can really, really address that, especially if they're designed, if you talk about bridges, underpasses, the likes, art projects in those spaces can really make changes to people's lives around safety and all kinds of things that are not just going to be considered generally by the term mural. And I get that, but I mean, I wish we had the money. I'm terribly excited by some artists I meet who do all kinds of installation projects in those sort of dead end spaces that we all would like to enliven and really bring youth on and young and old together. I know I'm speaking in sort of grandiose terms, but that is the sort of thing we're trying to get out of this. And I strongly believe we really do have resident support in these projects, because they're also, if you go back a few years, 2024, when there was the massive engagement on our arts and culture strategy, this public art came out, not having to pay to see art, that art is for everyone, came out really strongly from that engagement. So there's other ways of knowing what residents are really keen on as well.
Sorry, just a point of clarification. Sorry, Councillor Williams, I'm not sort of denigrating your enthusiasm for the art of the murals at this point, but I think what I am just trying to say at this stage is that in terms of public realm and sort of street and curbside improvements, to me, SUDS is one of the ones that actually you're doing on this for one of the other the sustainable. So that's hugely important, the SUDS, for preventing flooding. And there's been some excellent work down in Muswell Hill. The trouble is, a cabinet member went out recently with a resident because our SUDS is overgrown and they're saying, look, we can't maintain it. And that's to prevent flooding. And that's actually quite high on the NSIL, list of criteria about public realm and some improvements. So I'm sort of going, absolutely, I hear the enthusiasm for art, and I'm certainly not saying we shouldn't have art, because I would love to, for this to be the world in which we could do that. But I think in this sort of environment, if we can't maintain our SUDS, and I've been told this has been going backwards and forwards at the bottom of Muswell Hill, and there was all that huge flooding, as councillors will know, and we had all that investment into those, and now they're not being maintained. So to me, it's like, I'm struggling, because residents are saying, but these are the practical things. And I'm going, well, hang on a minute. If we can't afford to do that, and we're saying to residents we can do other things like the murals, then it just seems like a disconnect at this point. And I understand what the enthusiasm for the art. I'm not saying I don't, but I'm just saying under these guidelines, SUDS does come up quite high because it's a flooding issue. So that to me would be something. Anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Right. So I'm not sure there was an actual question there, was there? But I mean, maintenance of a SUD wouldn't be covered by community infrastructure levy because it's a revenue, not a capital cost. So I mean, and that's a problem across local government, has been for a long time, and I don't think is going to be addressed with this NSIL allocation. Also, SUDs are pretty expensive, and if you look at the amounts of money per NSIL area, you can see why choices are made in that area as well.
Okay, thanks for that. Any more on 2? We were kind of edging into 3 anyway there, I think. And I suppose I'd like to ask officers actually the same question that I asked Councillor Rossetti, which is about the definition of infrastructure, what falls inside that definition, what falls outside that definition in your view?
I was just going to jump in before that happens, because going back to Councillor Rossetti, talked about that a festival wouldn't be infrastructure. It's to provide infrastructure so that the festival can run. So there's things like electrical points and stuff like that. So that's, yeah, I was just going to let you know you couldn't pay, NSIL couldn't pay for the sort of revenue side of it. It's for infrastructure so you can hold the festival. Yeah.
Hello, Rob Szosowski, Director of Planning and Building Standards. Definition of infrastructure is set out in law, but it's not a prescriptive list. It's not an exhaustive list. It's an indicative list. So there is an inevitable flexibility in the definition of infrastructure in law. And in law, for spending neighbourhood SIL can be spent on infrastructure or anything else that addresses the demands that development places on an area. So even if something is not defined as infrastructure, neighbourhood SIL can still be spent on it if it's addressing the demands that development places in an area. So that's our view in terms of infrastructure. And just picking up on some previous points as well as part of the answer on what's infrastructure, we should look at neighbourhood community infrastructure levy not in isolation. There's a bigger context that there is strategic community infrastructure levy as well. So actually that's a much bigger pot of money. For neighbourhood SIL here, we're talking about 1.7 million, which is still significant and can make a big impact. But strategic community infrastructure levy, the pot of money there is in the millions and millions of pounds, and that contributes to the sort of wider capital programme of the council. So when we're talking about sort of the nuts and bolts of infrastructure, the streetscape and other things which are absolutely important to residents, there's actually a bigger pot of money, strategic SIL, which is spent on a whole range of things, including some of those nuts and bolts of infrastructure as well. So I think it's just important to look at it in the bigger context of SIL spending on things that are also important to residents. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Any further questions on point 3? Councillor Connor.
Okay, so I'm going to ask on point 3 around the projects which are not capital infrastructure or addressing demands of development. So from your perspective as officers, I suppose the question is, do we, or do you, because you've written the report, consider, and especially because murals has been brought up, I know we keep going on about it, but it's in the call-in, so it's, yeah. So it's what we're talking about tonight. When we're talking about infrastructure and we're talking about requests from residents for better lighting, which I've had recently, benches which I've had recently, it's that infrastructure part, and I'm really struggling to see the evidence in here as to why we're not spending money in those areas. And I know you keep coming back to me and saying, well, you've looked at all these projects and you've looked at the 500, but with scrutiny, and I'm desperately trying to scrutinise the evidence, and I'm really struggling, and I'm really sorry, but I am, as to why I can go back and say, well, we haven't got better lighting between one of the roads and going up to Ali Pali, which a load of women have been pushing for a long time with me, and I've not got anywhere. I can't go back to my residents and say, look, the benches you've been asking for, and the council said they haven't got money. That's all infrastructure. The drop curbs with that tactile thing, people with disabilities been asking me for it, and I've gone, no, I'm really sorry, the council haven't got any money. And I have been saying this because we know the council haven't got any money. And I'm just really struggling to understand the evidence within this report as to why we're not doing those. And Rob, I hear what you're saying, there's a bigger pot of money, but it's not evidenced in here. So I don't know where that money is, what's going on with that, who's making those allocations. Why is that funding not coming up then? And when I'm asking, as a councillor, why is no one saying to me, oh, don't worry, councillor, there's another big pot of money. Actually, you can ask for a bench for your resident who's really struggling with health conditions, because, so I'm just trying to work out how we marry these two together. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, everyone has a view on what the most important or least important types of infrastructure might be. As officers, what we've sought to do is work in accordance with the council's adopted governance. So as set out in the report, our position, our recommendations are clearly based upon what the law says, what people have told us through the consultation, based upon the existing neighbourhood seal guiding criteria, which were originally prepared by a scrutiny committee of this council, and an equalities consideration. So that's the basis on which we've arrived at these projects. What I'm hearing from you is maybe there is a better way to govern how we spend NSIL or StreetSIL as a council. We've worked on the existing governance document. There's a commitment in the original cabinet report to review this governance, which we aim to do in the next 1 to 2 years. So there can be, or there will be, a wider conversation, including with the public, about how our governance might better fit the position the council is in now. So that's a conversation we can have in the future. But as officers, we work within what we've got. And that is why my response, my paper, the original report is so narrowly focused on these number of small things.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, that leaves us with point 4, which is about the constitutional principles of decision making. Does anyone have any questions on point 4? Councillor Small.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify, Mr. Topol and Mr. Kozowski? I'm sorry, Rob. Thank you, Councillor Williams. Just on the point, I've heard in a number of answers tonight about the amount of that you are responsible for the reports that have been drawn up that went to cabinet, that also the additional reports here. Just addressing the point of the call in about due consultation and taking of professional advice from officers. Can you just give us an indication from your professional opinion about the level of consultation you have had as part of this process, and whether or not you have an opinion on the level of professional advice that you've been given, and that you can see evidence within the reports that have been put forward to Cabinet and by Councillor Williams, please?
Yes, absolutely. A good, strong consultation response effort was made to make sure it was an engaging process, it was easy to use, and following all the general consultation principles, and being open to general themes of ideas put forward, but also open to specific suggestions as well. So absolutely confident that there's been thorough analysis of the consultation responses. We actually got an extra bit of resource in the team specifically for 6 months to do this piece of work and to look through the consultation responses and to do the engagement. So we actually made an extra special effort to do that for Neighbourhood Seal, because community engagement is so important in anything that the council and planning service does, but particularly for Neighbourhood Seal. So yes, I'm absolutely confident that it has been based on that, and in addition to that, looked through the guiding criteria and the seal governance document as a whole. So marrying those two things together is not an easy task, but I'm confident that has been undertaken thoroughly.
Can I just clarify that? Thank you. That's very helpful. Can I also clarify in the other direction as well, in terms of your professional advice in going to to Councillor Williams or to the decision making through that process? So I hear how you've listened to the public, and I'm also just keen to know about the level of consultation with your professional expertise when it came to the decision making process internally as well.
Yes, all through the full and thorough internal process as well, in terms of the internal consultation on that, if that's what you're getting to. So absolutely, we work as a team on that. I approve the relevant reports as well as the corporate director as well. So there's a whole lot of sort of internal scrutiny through all the relevant checks and balances, legal advice, finance advice, and there clearly are legal and finance issues that have been asked about today. So absolutely gone through all the full, thorough, due internal consultation processes as well. So I'm very satisfied with the original cabinet report. Thank you.
Councillor Connor.
Okay, so one final question then for me on this is understanding the thorough process that you've gone through, listening to the response back to Councillor Small's question around that process. Can you let us know where in the report we get that thorough understanding of that, other than the fact that you're telling us you've done it and we've got these sort of headlines on it. Where do we in residents get to see that? That's kind of where I'm stuck, and I'm just, yeah, and so whereabouts can we get that reassurance? Because as a scrutiny committee, we have to scrutinise what's in front of us. Thanks.
Yeah, and completely understand where you're coming from. But yes, the details there, we've got the appendices, we've got the detailed analysis against the projects and the criteria, which are all in there. We've taken into account the equalities issues, the key themes and the top priorities that have come out of that are in there. So I think it's a very clear community message put through in the cabinet report on what the top priorities of the community were. And that's the most important thing in this, is how the community have expressed that. And that's clear in the report.
Okay, thanks. Are there any further questions on this? No, I don't see any. Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Bryce and Rob and Councillor Williams, for answering our questions. Right, so now I'm going to ask Heidi and John to introduce the report from the monitoring officer and the section 151 officer, which is in the supplementary pack from pages 1 to 6, on whether this decision falls within the budgetary and policy framework or not, noting that that is not actually it's not claimed that it's outside the budget and policy framework.
You're right, Chair. It's not. The call-in has not challenged whether or not, has not claimed that the decision falls outside of the policy and budget framework. Within the report, I draw your attention to paragraph 6.8, which refers to the policy framework and reminds members that it's intended to provide a general context within which decision making occurs, and so providing decisions do not fall foul of those plans laid out in section 6.6, then they're deemed to be within the budget and policy framework. Sorry, the policy framework and the budget framework is for John. And in paragraph 8, you will see the monitoring officer's assessment confirming that the decision made on the 10th of March is within the policy framework.
Thanks. John?
Yeah, you'll see from section 10.1 that the section 151 officer's assessment is that the decision taken by cabinet was within the budget framework. Nothing further to add.
Thanks, John. So do members of the committee have any questions on this report for John or Heidi? Councillor Small.
Thanks, Chair. Just one small one, just a procedural thing. Now we're in the purdah period before the election. Just to clarify what the process would be if scrutiny did choose to refer back to cabinet. Is that something that still happens within this period? It's not a decision that's excluded from that and so on?
No,
it all proceeds as normal?
No, it'd be Aisha's job to arrange that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's what we've got to decide. So as we set out at the start of the meeting, we're now going to adjourn the public part of the meeting, and committee members and officers are going to leave the room to consider the information we've heard, deliberate on the call-in decision. Once we've made that decision, we're going to come back to the meeting room. We'll resume the public part of the meeting, and that part of the meeting will be available to the public. So I'm going to ask the Head of Democratic Services to confirm when the meeting recording has stopped.
Sorry, do we wait here? Yeah, okay.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for your patience. We've now come to a decision on the call-in. So first of all, we come to a decision on whether the original decision was inside or outside of the budget and policy framework. And we've agreed that it's inside the budget and policy framework. So could I just ask committee members to indicate their agreement with that for the record? So I agree. Okay, that's unanimous. Right, we've also considered the information from the call-in, from the cabinet member and the officer reports, and we've agreed as a committee that no further action should be taken on this and the decision can be implemented. Can committee members indicate their agreement? So those in favour? And against? Okay, so that's a majority decision for 1. I just want to say that that decision was based on us considering all 4 points of the call-in. We considered that the call-in focused on just a couple of quite a large number of projects that received NSIL funding, and none of the evidence we considered indicated that the projects were not eligible for funding, even though there were issues of how the projects were classified that were discussed. There was not enough evidence to suggest that there were unreasonable decisions made on project allocations. And therefore, we didn't think that there was a need to refer this decision back to Cabinet. There was also no suggestion in the call-in that the consultation wasn't conducted properly. And we noted that the public consultation that was carried out informed the decision. We were satisfied that the Cabinet gave due regard to the consultation results. Now, I'm going to give Councillor Connor an opportunity to set out why she dissented from this decision.
Thank you, Chair. So my dissension was basically I hadn't heard enough evidence today within this report to justify the report's proposals around the public support for the project and particularly the funding status of the proposed projects. Those are the 2 areas that I felt the report was particularly weak on, specifically in terms of the mural and the civic centre garden. So for these reasons, I said that I would support the call-in of the decision to go back to Cabinet, particularly around those 2 areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Connor. So if nobody has anything further to add, and I don't think they do, we can close this meeting. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for staying so late. It's a late one tonight.